against that councillor? Not in the least bit, because it suits their narrative. It suits the fact that they want a world at which they can stand up and say, we're the only party for black South Africans, which quite frankly, I find that a historical backpedaling towards apartheid rather than, in fact, the project of a non-racial South Africa that we want to build.
We all know where the DA comes from, that amalgamation with the National Party, the old National Party and so on. So it's logical to presume that perhaps there are some people still who have some of those old beliefs, but under the blanket of a new kind of DA image in public. Do you find anything of that in your party?
Look, there are National Party ministers, there are National Party MPs that are in the ANC. Some of them are still serving in the ANC. So to suggest that it's only a matter of saying they are now only in the DA or anything like that cannot be true. These are South Africans who, for many of them, came to different parties. Now, that's the first thing. The second thing is, I come from the ANC and I've moved to the DA. So there's a part of me that says it's plausible that South Africans who maybe in one level or another party can come to the DA and understand what we stand for, learn values and say, this is where we're going, and this is the South Africa they want to see. And I believe that if there are racists within the DA, make no mistake, I'll be the first to deal with them, because as I've proven, that in any context, in any motion, when there's a challenge that speaks to that sort of behavior, that's not the party we're from. I've been clear on this stance since the beginning, and ultimately what I'm building now is South Africans who are sharing values. And there are South Africans who come from all sorts of political persuasions. There are people who come from the PAC who are in the DA. You can recall that Mayor de Lille stood in the PAC and made statements in the PAC. Now she's in the DA and she espouses the values that we stand for. There are South Africans from a variety of political parties that are now seeing the vision that we've put forward and saying, we want to coalesce around this vision. What South Africans we don't want in the DA are South Africans who are hankering for the past. We want South Africans who are committed to the future. And the spread as to where they come from goes in different places.
It's very clear from the start that any logical person would presume that you were elected as a leader simply because, apart from your personality and how wonderful you are or not, is whether you can actually deliver the black vote, because that is the vote that will make a difference in the support of the DA. You had about 18% of the vote of black people within the party, but almost 50% of those who voted for you were whites. So therefore, whatever you do with Diane Kolobana, you have this difficult position that you must actually satisfy the one end and satisfy the other end. Are you making progress in delivering the black vote?
We're making big progress. Look, let me take Gauteng as a simple example. And I know I'm not in Gauteng as I'm speaking to you today. The ANC had a commanding lead of 64%. They came down to 53%. We grew to 30%. To even begin to suggest that 30% of the people who voted for us were exclusively white would be a misnomer. Because it speaks to the fact that our party is speaking to a diverse range of South Africans, which is the party that we're trying to build. If you came with me to Nelson Mandela Bay, you would discover quite quickly that, in fact, as we're getting into the 40% of the party and we want to grow and get over the 50% mark so we can govern there, you would realize quite quickly that it's improbable to suggest that these are just South Africans of a particular race. So the work that I'm committed to doing is to say, as we grow into different areas, as we grow in Joburg, as we grow in Tlokwe, right here, it is certainly not on the back of just a singular race, because that's not the project we're engaged with. We're engaged with the fact that if there must be one race, it must be the human race. And ultimately, we must focus our interventions on saying, here's our South Africans who have been left out of the economy fundamentally because of race. How do we build an inclusive economy so that we take South Africa forward? This is what I truly believe. I truly believe that it is possible that somebody who even says, you know, one of the things I learned when I did Heritage Day, I went to the 1956 treason trial. When I got there, I realized the one thing was that it was South Africans from all colors who were committed to fighting against apartheid for the benefit of the fight for the liberation of black South Africans. This is true today, is that what the DA is doing is to say, it is a South African from all walks, and it must. Even if you said to me, I'm a white South African, I still find it offensive that a child who goes to a toilet in Limpopo falls into a pit latrine. So what the child is black, I'm committed to fighting for it because I believe in a fair society. Those are people we're building within the DA. And I'm seeing the fact that we're growing across all spectrums. I'm seeing the fact that even our black supporters saw huge potential. And so I'm quite comfortable that what we're working towards, because we're not building to say, let's attract black South Africans who say, well, the DA must just simply represent us. We're building with black South Africans who are saying, we must build a non-racial party across the spectrum. And that's a South Africa that I want to see going forward.
Since you've taken us to the Eastern Cape, were you personally happy about the fact that King Dalindyebo was accepted as a member of this party, knowing that his conviction was on appeal for serious crimes?
I don't run an ideology test for anybody who joins the DA. In this instance, here was somebody who had gone on appeal. We're quite clear, as the law puts it in South Africa, that you are innocent until proven guilty in this particular instance.
But he was already proven guilty.
He had gone on appeal. He'd gone on appeal. And he's entitled to do so. The laws of the country do give us that right. In fact, and he went on appeal. But the condition was this. Firstly, King Dalindyebo was not a public rep of the DA. Secondly, he was joining as an ordinary member. We've got a lot of people who join as ordinary members. Thirdly, we made it crystal clear to him that if he lost his appeal, he would lose his membership immediately because that violates our constitution, to which we did. And we consistently acted in this regard.
But he wasn't an ordinary member. You know it, of course. Why did you allow him in the first place? It's because he can deliver more people.
Could he have joined online? He could have, just as well have joined online. He was the first one. We didn't go and approach him and say, King Dalindyebo, we need you in the party. He's the one who made contact with us and said, I'd like to join the DA. He could have done it online. He could have done it through one of our councillors. He could have done it in any other way he so chose to do so. He's entitled to do that. South Africans can choose any political party they so want to choose. That's the whole point. But the ultimate thing is that we're quite clear that if you break the law and you get found in violation of a particular law and the courts pronounce that that's it, we found you guilty of this matter, it becomes crystal clear that you lose your membership as a DA. And I believe in this instance we've acted deliberately, immediately, and removed his membership.
And correctly.
Correctly. Hey?
You're happy about that?
Yeah. I mean, that's what our rules say. For me, the issue here is the fact that when it happens in the DA, we act immediately. But you often find that in other political spectrums, even when people are found guilty, even when people go on any process, it doesn't seem as though anyone is adamant about acting against anybody. I can go through a whole list of charges in any other political party, and you'll discover quite quickly no action gets taken. We're the party that says, if there's something that takes place, we take action immediately.
Well, since we are in the Eastern Cape, your mother comes from Koffenwaba. Do you find that your support is growing there, also because of her, or the fact that you have some kind of link to that area?
Our growth in the Eastern Cape has been growing, particularly in those areas, because, I mean, my mother left the Eastern Cape for quite a long time ago. But what is key has been the fact that we've got some very good activists there. You'll see Nosimo Balindlela is doing some really, really good work and doing the ground-to-ground war that she's doing, and she's certainly going from village to village. And so we're seeing that amongst women in the Eastern Cape, who sometimes face some of the toughest challenges because they can't own property, they can't, for all sorts of traditional arrangements, we're finding that there's massive growth. I was in Mdantsane about 3 weekends ago, and when I was in Mdantsane, I saw how profound just the support of the DA was there. So I'm quite confident that as we do more of our door-to-door, more of our activism, begin to focus the party on the future of South Africa, we can get to a point where ultimately we show to South Africa that we're a party that is non-racial, regardless of what our political opponents want to say. And I'm comfortable to see that our growth is taking the shape that it is.
We're almost a little bit more than a year away from the elections. It must happen between May and August of next year. Can you give us an indication of what your best expectation is for those elections next year?
We really want to govern in Nelson Mandela Bay, and we've set a very big program there. We want to govern in Tshwane. We want to pull the ANC below 50% in Joburg. We want to ensure that even here in Tlokwe, if there's no verneke rate with the demarcation, that we can govern here in Tlokwe. And so those would be, for us, good outcomes. We've certainly focused, and it would put us in the right metros that we believe we've got good potential in. We want to also retain what we govern right now. So it's places like Midvaal, it's all the municipalities that we govern, plus the retention of Cape Town.
Well, the demarcation board suggested that Tlokwe, Potchefstroom should combine with Ventersdorp. Soon after that, there was violence here and in Ventersdorp. Ironically, the DA is also against this, of course. Where did this violence come from?
I think because when the Municipal Demarcation Board made the pronouncement, one of the things they failed to do is to actually consult with people, which is fundamental to the process of any mergers of municipalities. So they didn't do that. There was no public consultation. We've gone to court to go argue the issue, and the community is certainly not comfortable with it. And so the community here, and I've certainly met with some of the activists that come from different places. You can remember, at last year's election, this was the very municipality that the ANC's councillors, some of them voted in support of a DA candidate to become mayor in this place. Then when the independent candidates moved across, they legitimately went to the courts, to which we assisted in that particular process, to say, when you look at the process, if you read Judge Wappenaar's minority report, he says there was some substantial moving of people into areas. So now what we worry about is that there's a weakening of an institution like the MDB. There's also the weakening of the institutions such as the IEC. So South Africans don't feel that the institutions of government that are being now taken over by people in the ANC are being undermined. And so I was very comfortable in, well, I don't support any violent protest. I support people's right to protest, but I don't believe protests must be violent. And I think that in this instance, South Africans have the right to object to this process, as we will in court, and we hope that we can maintain the fact that Tlokwe can remain an independent municipality, because certainly it can deserve a government that will be led by the DA, so we can begin to turn around the delivery of basic services in this town.
You've already won the court case against the merger of Midvaal. Is it going to happen here as well?
We're hoping so. I mean, and in this instance, we've gone for everything, because what is happening here is also happening in Bavians, which are key municipalities that we've got a strong interest in, but it's happening right across the country. And we don't want to say, just because our personal interests can be jeopardized, we've got to argue the principle. It's about safeguarding the Municipal Demarcation Board. So any government that would come in the future cannot have the same process violated. So we've gone for everything. We've thrown in the municipalities that we've got interest in, but we've also said nationally, if there are municipalities that were affected by undue process, that must ultimately ensure the fact that we reevaluate the process, so that you can't just, like the old government did, you talk about who's missing apartheid, just start to move boundaries where you think you're going to lose and suddenly start to make it difficult for the opposition.
Let's move to some of the issues. Let's start with education. What's happening at the moment, as you know, on various campuses, including this one and also Stellenbosch, is there's a movement to say Afrikaans is a language of exclusion. It should not be allowed as a medium of teaching at universities, especially not here or in Stellenbosch. Do you believe that, or do you agree?
When we signed the Constitution of the Republic, the discussion was there. It's not like a new discussion. The discussion was there. And the Constitution makes it explicit that any South African is entitled to be taught in the language they so prefer. And so the current suggestion to say that Afrikaans must now be marginalized really stems, I believe, cannot stand for constitutional muster as a starting point. So we must uphold the Constitution. If you want to review what happens with Afrikaans, then review the Constitution. But then the second issue is the fact that it is the right of South Africans to be taught in any language they so choose. What I'd encourage is the fact that institutions right across, in the pursuit for inclusivity, must be able to offer additional languages so that those subjects are there. Because that way we can allow for the diverse expression in universities as what we're seeing. That way we can ensure that, and in fact, here's the really thing for me is that there are more non-white South Africans who speak Afrikaans than there are white South Africans who speak Afrikaans. So the opportunities are there, and I'm asking the question, And certainly in my consultation with Stellenbosch and any other universities, I've said to them, and as they reflect back to me, as they said, we're very open to that. The only limitation is the fact that it's a budgeting issue, which speaks to the question about how do you do financing of higher education so that we can open up more opportunities and include more South Africans into campuses. I think that's possible because ultimately then you build the diverse society that you want to see.
Some movements like the Free Stellenbosch and also the ANC Youth League argue that tertiary education should be free. Is that your view as well?
I think it should be free to qualifying students. I think when a student gets the appropriate marks at a university, we mustn't hamper them with the burden of cost, because ultimately we'll create a society of South Africans from broad spectrum that can do that. But there again is a question of how do we finance it. And we've proposed that in fact the increase in the National Student Financial Aid Scheme so that young people who are able to qualify, who get into university, can be able to not be burdened with the challenge of financing around the issue. So I think it's possible. I think South Africa needs to reprioritize the allocated funding that goes into tertiary institutions.
And for the audience here, I think another issue now, jumping to agriculture, is that land reform is a very difficult situation. And the farmers are seen, generally speaking, within the ANC as intransigent and that they do not want to reform. Do you believe that?
I don't believe that at all. In fact, when I've gone to every province, I've met with the different farming unions, Agri-SA, Agri-Northwest, in fact, I met with Agri-Northwest. In the meeting of the executive with Agri-Northwest, the agreement in principle was, look, we want to negotiate, we want to come out. Gone are the days now where you can sit down and say farming is for a race. Farming is farming. And we must accept it from that point of view to say that if we don't manage the policy of land reform, we'll end up with less and less farmers, regardless of what race they are. If you look at the numbers, they've dropped down from 130,000 now to below 30,000, which is a challenge because the issue of farming also has to speak to the broad issue of land, of food security and making sure that there's an economic imperative of employing people. So our view is that ultimately we must talk about security of tenure so that people know that they can secure the land for a period of time. We must talk about the expediency around which we move the process when we need to move it. We've shown it in the Western Cape that we've reallocated land where we've needed to relocate it faster than any other province. But that furthermore, when you come into a community, let's negotiate with farmers as people who are committed to the process. And when I spoke to the farmers, I felt the attitude was, look, we want to work. We want to train up more farmers, regardless of race. Here in South Africa, we've got innovative. We don't always have the best climate. I'm sure your audience can attest to the heat that's been taking place this week. But the reality of it is that we don't always have the best climate, but we've got to innovate within that climate. And so I think some of our farming has been innovative, has been at the cutting edge, and we need to be able to transfer that skill so that we get better farmers, diverse farmers, and ultimately make sure the issue of food security is on the table. So I don't buy the populist view that simply says that, no. This is a sense at which people don't want to come into the negotiating table. I actually found such a different attitude on the table to say, let's come together and make sure farming is sustainable and can deliver the outcomes it wants to deliver.
I'm jumping around because time is catching up with us. I want to open it to the floor, but let me go to Parliament. Do you sometimes get frustrated thinking that these guys, the red ants, the red berets, they are stealing my thunder?
Which party is that again? Sorry. Look, if I think about what issues they focused on, the one was pay back the money. The other was on PARMED. And then the other has been literally pulling ZAP signs at Deputy President, etc. So if we start with the first one on Nkandla, we've built up the case law around that issue. We've gone with Hlaudi Motsoeneng and fighting the public protector. We've now taken him to the Supreme Court of Appeal. When we get to the Concourt, this issue has got a history of case law that we can enforce the public protector's remedial action. That's how you build the case. On the PARMED issue, this is an issue that benefits the EFF, at least in the look that they want. So it's not really to the service of all of South Africans. And then on the third, which is the issue of pulling ZAP signs, it's always a pity that in fact our front pages of newspapers will be plastered with someone who's pulled a ZAP sign, who's doing all of those things, and using language that is colorful. It means sometimes that can distract us from the real issues. So I don't see them any different to what the ANC is doing. I think the ANC's executive has colonized Parliament. They've ultimately made sure that ministers have got more power. Ministers don't answer questions. Ministers just do whatever. And they found a helpful partner in the EFF who disrupt Parliament so that the ministers get away, etc., etc. So it's the same coin, just different sides, and they certainly come from the same home, so it's not anything that's uniquely different. And so when I sit here today, as I say, we've got to fight and fight for the contestation of space, but the long term, the politics of the long term says if you stand for the right issues, for principle, as we've diversified, we're the only party in Parliament that's been fighting for the economy. We're the only party in Parliament that's been fighting about, let's talk about the crime stats, let's talk about Bashir, let's talk about issues that actually, the education, SATU, let's talk about what is happening actually to South Africans' real lives. When we talk about Nkandla, we went to committee and fought for that issue to say, here's what South Africans are feeling about it. So as a party, we've got to stand up and say, the voice for South Africans is this, and we don't want Parliament to be destroyed, because the day Parliament falls apart is the day our very essence of our democracy falls apart. And so it's up to what you as a party want to stand for. I could also come there next week and say, I'm going to wear an overall and pull ZAP signs. There's more of us than the EFF, so we could do a much louder noise. But we recognize the fact that we've got to stand up for the institution, for if the institution of Parliament falls apart, then hier kom 'n ding, as they say.
Mr. Maimane, I had the opportunity over the past year or so to watch you in Parliament because I'm writing the news every day. So I receive the visuals and I look at it, and usually I have to write the stories. And I've seen a development in your style and that you've changed, probably because as a result of what the EFF is doing. Is it true? Were you forced to change your style?
I think what's happened in Parliament is that we've had to become a lot more robust.
You personally?
Personally, a lot more robust. And I've always wanted for Parliament to be a contestation of ideas. And as we stand here today, I've certainly taken a much tougher stance against the ANC, because in the beginning, I believed, maybe naively so, that this was a party that still wanted to uphold the Constitution, that still wanted to listen to reason and argument. Now it's a party that just wants to use its numbers to protect number one. So I've had to take a stance that says, how do we get bolder, stronger, and a lot more aggressive against the ANC? It still doesn't change the fact that we've got an argument, we've got to contest for ideals, and we've got to be much tougher in the ring. But I've certainly personally have felt that we've had to be stronger and tougher, and I've watched it in my own self, and I've welcomed the fight. You know, one of my favorite moments in Parliament, funny enough, was when we debated the Bashir motion, and the ANC came, because it's the only time they come to Parliament is to defend President Zuma. Even that, then the numbers are all there. We just do debate the economy, then people leave and go have coffee. But when it's President Zuma, no, everyone shows up. So they're all there in their numbers. And one of my favorite moments is that when I came back the second time to debate, I heard this rousing boo from the ANC, literally against me. And it made me realize that what Helen Suzman opposed the National Party for against apartheid, that she was alone, she was a single voice, but they were willing to take her on their numbers, and I saw the same trends, the same tenets by the ANC on that day, and I felt good to say that we can take the fight and we'll take it to wherever level, even if they use their numbers. So Helen Suzman was in the minority. She's now grown. We've got now 89 members of Parliament. So her project has been successful whilst the National Party was voted out. And I can assure you today, we may be in the minority today, but it's not going to be a long time. We'll certainly come up against, and I'll keep standing up for principle, because there will come a day where the ANC will be outvoted, because they will come below the 50% mark.
Certainly you take... You are taking the fight to number one in particular. Do you personally dislike President Zuma?
No, I don't actually. No, President Zuma, I don't dislike President Zuma. I don't actually. He's old enough to be my grandfather, and I respect him. And I say that out of a respectful place. I don't dislike him at all. The way I describe it is to say, I've got an art painting in my office of President Nelson Mandela, done by a very good friend of mine, that I keep up at my office. And it's an original. There's no other art painting like it. My little kids sometimes come to my office, and even if they took a paintbrush and thought to themselves, let's add to this art painting, I think I'd be annoyed with them because they can't add to that painting. It must stand on its own. And in truth, I'm not motivated by hatred for President Zuma. I'm inspired by a love for South Africa. And if I believe that he, in the canvas of South Africa, is taking the wrong paintbrush to South Africa, then we must fight him with everything that we can, because I love South Africa.
Okay, let me ask this last question before we go to our audience. And it is tradition in Parliament that the leader of the opposition, from time to time, gets together with the president, because there are issues to discuss apart from Parliament and so on, is how together perhaps they can take the country forward. Do you ever meet with President Zuma in that sense?
I've written to him a few times requesting a meeting with him. He's certainly taken a stance that says, look, he won't meet, but that's his own decision. I've met with Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, and we felt that where there are projects that we can work on together, I certainly would be supportive of it. Because at the end of the day, exactly the former point, I still believe in this country. I still want this country to work. I don't wish ill on South Africa so that the DA might succeed. I actually want us to do well as a nation. So I've certainly written to him, certainly in the economic crisis. I mean, look, if we think about it, 70% of black youth cannot find work. I think that's a worrying statistic. And so I've written to him and said, President, there's an economic crisis, please. Off the record, I'd love to meet with you because we believe we've got some proposals that we can make. You may have some proposals, because if together we can find ourselves to a point where we say, here's the South Africa that we want to see, we're better off. If he he's chosen to ignore that, and he only responds on certain other matters, that's his own decision. But from my end, I'm certainly committed to making sure that if we can work together to get South Africa forward, I'll do it.
Thank you. En nou het ons die geleentheid vir mense om vrae te vra as julle wil, maar kan ek asseblief vra met groot respek, een vraag per persoon en vra 'n vraag, moenie 'n toespraak afsteek nie. Ons het alreeds 'n politikus hier so wat baie kan praat, so julle moet asseblief kort, kragtig vra. Ons het 'n mikrofoon daar. So hierdie dame hier so voor was eerste gewees. Sê net kortliks jou naam en dan vra jy net kort, kragtige vraag asseblief.
Ek is Hantie Kreur. Ek wil graag weet of ons kan reken op vry en regverdige verkiesings volgende jaar. Will we have free and fair elections right through the country?
The credibility of the IEC.
Sure.
Shall we keep that? En kom ons kyk of ons daar nog so 2 vrae kan vat miskien. Is daar nog iemand wat vrae wil vra?
I just want to make notes.
Nee. So ek kan nie glo nie, daar moet toch oor die ekonomie, ons het nie die ekonomie behoorlik gehanteer nie, ek kan julle punte gee wat julle kan oor dinge oor vra, byvoorbeeld veiligheid, misdaad, buitelandse beleid, dis alles goeders wat ek nog nie weer behoorlik aan aandag kon gee nie. So, enige ander vraag? Ja? Yeah, right in front here. This is Daniela van Heerden. Daniela?
I'm Daniela Musi, but I'm asking on behalf of someone on cyberspace. It's Peter Pence. I know he's a first-year student here at Potch, and he wants to know, what would you say is the role of the youth today in South Africa?
Wel, kom ons gee vir Musi nou die geleentheid om te praat, want lyk my dit vat 'n bietjie stadig vir julle om aan die gang te kom. Okay.
Op die eerste keer, when we talk about the IEC, my biggest concern, that's why we voted against it in Parliament, is that they took someone like Vusi Mashinini, who was a strategic advisor to the president, and sent him to the IEC, which is a worrying trend. The second is that on the ground, the IEC relies on SATU principles to be the ones who become election monitors, which SATU is an ANC affiliate. So of course, it's in their interest for the ANC to win. So it is a worrying issue for all of us as South Africans. The only way we can do it, and maybe to merge the two questions, what young people must do is go volunteer at voting centers. Because there, you can be able to argue the case to say, we had 5,000 ballots today. it's improbable that we can have 7,000 ones that we're counting now. Just a simple basic thing like that. Or to make sure that if someone makes a cross on a party and the line crosses over a little bit, they've monitored it. That the capturing is correct. That we stand on the borders of municipalities to make sure that no one buses anyone in. It's a role that all of us must do because we can't just rely simply on the IEC to execute the election. It's up to us as citizenship to make sure they're free and fair. And I think young people have a great role to play even towards that as active participants of our democracy. And if you can recall, in '76, young people were at the forefront of this issue. Young people have a great role to play even today. And so to answer the second question even more so, young people need to be able to stand up and say, we can contribute to South Africa. My biggest fear now is that the biggest vote that's growing in South Africa is the no vote. It's people who say, I'm not going to do anything, I'm not going to register, I'm not going to go vote. Young people, the registration percentage amongst young people is low. And that's not good enough. This is our country we're talking about as young people. I mean, I'm only a few months older than the president of the Youth League, so I can speak as young people. We must together understand the fact that our country requires us more than ever before to stand up and say, we'll go register to vote, we'll contribute in discourse, we'll stand up for this South Africa, and ultimately contribute to it. And young people are great entrepreneurs, they can innovate, they can start businesses to hire people, and I believe it's that time that young people can contribute into.
Just to tell you, Musi is 35 years old. He became 35 in June, so he's been disqualified as a young leader. Any other? Yiso?
Thank you. Mr. Maimane, can you give us your views on Eskom and the power problems in South Africa? How do you perceive the future of, and what do you see as the solution for this power crisis not to be a dark Africa again? Thank you.
Baie dankie. Is daar nog ander vrae? Okay, over there. Goed, ons kom nou by jou. Over there. So.
My name is Koos Marie. I just want to know where does the DA stand in regards to the welfare state? It's going to be a difficult decision to stop 16 million grants. How are you prepared to take a very unpopular decision and do something about it, because that is the ANC power base?
Hierso is 'n persoon hierso, the person right here. If you can be kind. Staan maar nader dat ons jou kan sien asseblief. Loop, kan jy deurkom?
Why, thank you very much. Mr. Robinson, just bear with me for a moment.
You want to make a speech or what?
Well, my question will follow, but I need to say...
Well, make it short and sweet.
I'll try my best. You know, Mr. Maimane, you know, all of us at some... Well, most of the times, I suppose, also, or very often read emails with one eye. But I don't believe that all of us forward emails with one eye. So I'm afraid the explanation you're trying to give is something which, with respect, only yourself, Christa Blanche, and Juanita, his daughter, will believe. But thank you very much, on behalf of the ANC, that we've now know what the inner thinking of the inner circle of the DA is. And that is belonging back to the PVW Botha days. Now, Mr. Maimane, I know that you said you're going to win Tlokwe. Well, my friend, you're living in a pipe dream. That's not going to happen, with or without Ventersdorp. Well, my question to you is this. As is displayed in council at the moment, when, let's assume that I'm wrong, when we have to go into coalition at the end of the elections next year, will the DA go in coalition with the EFF, as they're doing at the moment in our council, or are you going to go in coalition with the ANC? Which do you want? Take your choice.
Thank you. Shall we take those questions?
Yeah, sure, we can. I think I'll take the last one first, because I'm afraid when you argue the case to say that there's an inner thinking in the DA that hankers back for PW Botha, you could not be far from the truth. I think it's misleading. I think it's misguided. I think it's wrong. And I think for you to take a platform such as this one to suggest that that is so, I find that disingenuous, personally. But on the second point, which is to say that however the email has been read or not read, that is a matter for the disciplinary hearing to deal with. I've taken the stance. I believe it's a defensible stance. We've taken the action that we need to do so. When the ANC shows an example of taking action against anybody, maybe I might be willing to listen to the argument a little bit more, to be quite honest. On the second question, which you asked me, is are we going to take Tlokwe or not? Well, the really good news is that at least one thing I know is that the ANC here certainly is, that's why we had so many, they voted for the DA, then they this. At least I know that here, they had to even bring the president here because it's quite clear that the structures here are dysfunctional. They know it. We know it. The issue here, the worry for Tlokwe is that I don't want it to be caught up in a political football. Actually, we must deliver water, which is a challenge here. We must make sure the infrastructure works, and we can deliver the basic services. So I'm committed to that project, and that's something that we're going to continue to work on. And certainly, my visit here is not the first. It's one of many. I've been here before. We'll continue to do it, and we'll give it our best shot in a free and a fair and a democratic way. So that's the exercise that we're going to do here around Tlokwe. The other two questions, really, about...
Could I just ask you as a follow-up to that, because he specifically also asked, are you prepared to go into a coalition with the EFF? Say, for instance, in Nelson Mandela Bay, if you have the opportunity, you get enough votes there, and the EFF together to make the government or to form a government, will you do so?
I don't discuss a penalty shootout before a match. I don't do that. We'll play the game to win it. And then whatever happens after that, there are only 4 principles that I go into any coalition with. It must be non-racist. It must not have cadre deployment. It must be defending of the Constitution, and it must be on a market-based economy. Those are the premise within which I'll go into any negotiation. So that's the route we'll go.
Okay.
So it's and the other 2 questions about welfare. So with South Africans faces some serious poverty. South Africans are poor. There are certain grants you certainly can't even get away from. There's a disability grant in the fact that people who are disabled need to be on a welfare program. There are grants about child welfare, which I think both you and I could agree that even at 290 rands, or I think the latest one is about just over 300 rands, no one can raise a child like that. The issue about grants isn't grants themselves. The issue about grants is the economy itself. The fundamental question that we must ask is, and I want to be clear about this, is that we've got to grow the economy so that more and more people have the choice to work. That's the issue. The issue is about economic growth and economic opportunities. And ultimately, my work is about, that's why we've put together a 5-point plan to say, here's the rescue package for the economy in the short term that we can do. Because if we can be able to, and I'll deal with the ESCOM issue now, create an environment where there's small, medium enterprises that can grow, if we can ensure that people can become entrepreneurs, we can begin to stimulate manufacturing, we can ensure that in the mining sector we don't have more people being laid off because of policy uncertainty, proudly brought to you by the ANC. If you can end up all of those issues being addressed, you can in the short term begin to create a stimulus. That's why we fought for the youth wage subsidy, because I'd rather have young people at work rather than at home not doing anything. So the issue here is about economic growth, because if you begin to address the economic growth, you broaden your tax pool, which means that you can finance your welfare state, but ultimately ensuring that South Africans have a choice and opportunity. So I don't want us to see the conversation as either or. I'd rather see us as the fact that the unpopular thing to say is in fact that we must grow the economy, and the only way we can do that is get the best government that can do that. That's the issue. So, the first question was about ESCOM. Now ESCOM as an entity has always been part of the state coffers. In the short term, remembering that in the ESCOM debate, you must have a short-term solution, you must have a mid-term solution, and a long-term solution. Let's take the short-term solution. Firstly, I think ESCOM must take part of its equity and sell it. Because what you then do is you can deal with part of the cash flow problem that ESCOM has had. You can't ask consumers to be, you can't ask them for a 23% hike. It's like asking people to pay more against trying to grow the economy at the right level. So you must make sure that we at least have some equity out of ESCOM that could be sold off to the private sector. The long-term solution is to actually to break up ESCOM so that it doesn't become the sole provider of energy. Allow it to have independent power producers that can compete. Allow it to ensure that the distribution business faces competition. Because what you then can do is that you can ensure that when someone says, I want to put up renewable energies, I want to put up solar, I want to put up gas, I want to do up all of those, they can be entitled to be able to invest in the infrastructure, ultimately be entitled to make sure that they themselves can be able to compete so that we deal with where ESCOM is at. The only reason, half of the time why ESCOM doesn't, is that as a state-owned enterprise, sometimes it gets bad leadership because the state sends whoever they feel like sending there. Secondly, it's always got a rich uncle in government, so there's always a bailout clause that's put towards ESCOM. And I'm saying if we allow it to compete, independent power producers to come on board, we will, as the National Development Plan says, you know that document? The National Development Plan says that it can diversify energy and put out different energy suppliers on the table. For me, the future of energy in South Africa cannot be nuclear in the sense that the ANC, this nuclear deal of 1 trillion rands, that's going to cripple our economy. There's no question about that. It must be a mix between nuclear, between coal, between hydro, between wind, between gas, between solar, and there must be better incentives as to how we finance municipalities so that there's better incentives for people to save energy and invest in the appropriate renewable energy going forward. So it must be to diversify energy in the long run so we can stabilize the grid.
Somewhat related to a degree, the whole issue of the payment by Hitachi to Chancellor House and the specific issue about party funding. Are you prepared to open up your books?
If I was in government, I would. But I'm not in government. Because I'll tell you what the problem is. Take FNB as an example. FNB took out an advert that said they had a problem with crime in South Africa. The ANC took them to task and said to them, if you don't withdraw that advert, we will withdraw our government business. Nedbank, the chairman, Quotas, made a statement, one line in the chairman's report. The ANC came to Nedbank and said, if you don't withdraw that statement, we will withdraw our government business. Can you imagine if anyone stood up publicly and said, I'm funding the opposition? They would face the worst level of crucifixion from this particular government. So it's clear to me that, in fact, if you opened up your books, you'd also be opening up to say you destroy any opposition funding and learn the lesson right throughout Africa. We've seen this lesson all the time, where in fact people dry up opposition funding so as to destroy opposition parties so that the ruling party stays in power forever. And there proves the point. They can gain benefits through Chancellor House and Hitachi, where they can look at state tenders, derive massive amounts of money, tantamount to insider training, get kickbacks and bribes so that they can continue to run their elections. The playing levels are skewed towards the ruling party. And so if you just simply allow yourself to that kind of abuse, you'd be in big trouble. If I went into government, I would certainly move for legislation that achieves that. But at this current point, with an ANC government who believes that they must be the sole custodians of funding, it would be an impossible exercise, to be quite honest with you. So, but on the Hitachi matter, I just want to highlight that you cannot separate Chancellor House and the ANC. It's such a pity that the law firm of President Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu is now being turned into a front company to be able to derive state tenders so that it can fund the ANC through the back door. We've said it before that, in fact, that was corruption, and Hitachi have just confirmed it. I'm waiting to see whether there'll be any actions. It's unlikely there will be, but the point at the end of the day is that that's why I've gone to lay charges against Hitachi, their board. I'll be at Hitachi on Thursday to protest, to say it is wrong that they can be able to influence tenders. In fact, in the report that Hitachi said, they said, we went with Chancellor House because we knew at that point the chairman would be an ANC person. Chancellor House was an ANC organization. It's in the report that they filed. You cannot separate Chancellor House and the ANC. It's unlikely the ANC didn't know, and they've derived. Hitachi have now garnered so many tenders in South Africa. The real question that we must ask is that when is the ANC going to pay back that undue benefit back to the fiscus, because we need that money for other things.
Any other questions from the floor?
My name is Johan Erasmus. If I think about all the rural areas in KwaZulu-Natal or wherever, I think about some young kids in schools, Viva ANC, that's all they learn. How do you get through to people like that, and are you busy with it? Thank you.
Okay. Over there and then right at the back.
Okay, good morning. My name is Wilma and I'm an educationalist. And at the moment, you know what our secondary school outcomes are. We've got unemployable youths. What is the DA future vision for education?
Thank you, and right at the back.
I'm going to stay anonymous. I just would like to ask you, what is the DA plan for thinking around adult education?
All right, let's take that one as the last one of this round, yes?
Yeah, Kevin Wall. A couple of things about communication and public relations, please, Mr. Maimani. The DA's got good economic policies. And apart from the occasional article and occasional reference, as Clinton said, it's the economy stupid. It should be number one. I don't know, maybe a more forceful spokesperson on economic issues. You need to do something about your profile on economics. The second thing is that I live in a constituency in a ward. There's a DA councillor. I don't even know who he is. He's invisible. I've been trying to find out from who's my councillor. I write to the DA website. Please tell me this, tell me that. I get no responses. Could you please work on that? Thank you.
Okay, let's take the questions.
Yeah. The first was on rural areas. Look, the only way you convert any voter, particularly in rural areas where the consumption of print media is low and radio is more prevalent and television is more prevalent, what you've got to do is achieve foot soldiers. And one of the projects that I'm engaged with is to say the party is an activist organization. So we send people on the ground to engage more and more people, so we talk to them. We go from village to village. I spend, in the tour of any particular province, 60% of the time will be spent in a rural area. So I go there and I speak to people all the time to try and engage them. So the only way we correct that is actually by hard activism. You can ask any one of our public reps here. They get measured on how many door-to-doors they do. So it's part of what it is. And so in rural communities, that doesn't change, so we do that. The second question on education is a really crucial one, because I think the greatest failure of the democratic South Africa has been the fact that prior we had Bantu education, and I still think Bantu education is still with us, which is the greatest crime of the lot. And it stems out of the fact that, firstly, I think through the influence of what SADTU has been doing, we've allowed, in some ways, the lack of accountability for teachers. I believe the only way you can address education, it doesn't matter where, you can talk infrastructure, which is right, you have to build the right schools, you can talk other things, but you need two things. You need a teacher who is well-trained, who has got the right resources, such as the right textbooks. So our view is that we've got to develop our teachers, particularly in the maths and science place. We know that if we develop our teachers in the maths and science place, it's got an economic imperative, but it's also got the development of teachers. And so we've decided that even when it comes to issues like the ANAs, we've outsourced it to a company outside so that we continue to assess our teachers to make sure they're getting better all the time, because when you've got a good teacher, you can achieve the outcomes that you want to do. The second is you need principals that are not elected to serve a union, but principals that are serving a school. And ultimately, with the right leadership, the right infrastructure, the right technology, which is becoming a key component of what we do in the education space, we can begin to bridge the gaps. Look, we've got to invest heavily in communities that didn't have good infrastructure and education. and certainly where teachers weren't well trained. It's a historical legacy. Part of it speaks to the fact that pre-1994, for some of our teachers, they only needed a matric to even teach matric, which is a historical challenge. That's why our colleges that train teachers, we must be pumping out more teachers than ever before who are well trained so that they can come into rural communities, urban communities, particularly township schools, so that they can begin to help our young people in this regard. So it's our plan for education, and immediately now we begin to explore different models, even of how we finance a school, how much money we put into the hands of a child. There are different models that are on the go. On the question about adult education.
Could I just, as a follow-up question, say, but you know, of course, you'll be up against SATU in this whole effort to develop teachers.
And it's a fight we must win. Because if we don't win that fight, and SATU continue to... SATU issue out jobs to teachers via WhatsApp. They know which teacher they want, and so and principals. It's a fight we must win. And it's a fight I'm not willing to back down from. Because if we allow this unencumbered process that SATU... And look, I'm not fighting against every union. I believe the rights of workers must be protected. But where I refuse is when a union can have undue influence to ultimately even appoint teachers and principals. It's a fight that we must win. Otherwise, the education of young South Africans stands in jeopardy. I was in the Eastern Cape, and when you get there, the teachers don't come to school because they've been told by SATU to stay at home in an unconstitutional manner. You go to the Northern Cape, SATU tell kids to march with them in the middle of the day. That can't be acceptable. We must ultimately make sure that kids are entitled to be in school and that we can develop the right education. So it's a fight I'm up for. It's not one I'm going to back down from. And that's why we started even last week saying I'm reporting them to the Human Rights Commission because I believe they've violated the rights of South Africans to learn. And we'll continue to fight that battle.
Adult education?
Adult education, quite clearly, it's a combination of what vocational training we can offer. And a combination of that. The right for any adult to want to go to school and do that, that's preserved anyways. But my challenge here is that in the colleges that speak to adult education, particularly, I think there's certain colleges like ABET, et cetera, they've been underfunded and under-resourced. We have a community of people that could be learning different dynamic skills and be entitled to become artisans, skill-based training. Yesterday I was in Soweto dealing with micro-entrepreneurs, and there were entrepreneurs who were saying, I want to go back to school to learn. And if we can assist in partnership for those entrepreneurs to be able to partner even in adult training, in partnership with big business schools, in partnership with certain universities, making sure that they can come in and learn the appropriate skills to develop their businesses, but it must be vocationally linked. So that if someone says, I want to do a skill in this particular area, whether that be in plumbing, whether that be in whatever skill they want to choose in South Africa, they're entitled to do so, because I believe that way it will allow us to have the right incentives around micro-enterprise, but it also allow us the space to develop our adult literacy and our ability for our adults to be able to develop themselves, which is a key component. And I know in communities such as Dobsonville, there are adult education centers that go in place, and they come in and they get to see people, and they get to train adults, and they do night school, and we must be able to assist with the funding in this regard, and the state must be leading in terms of financing it. The last question about the DA councillor, I really apologize to you, sir. And every year, I do an assessment of our public reps, and public reps know that if they're not responsive to their communities, we certainly don't take a light view on that. I assess everyone, the whole organization gets assessed every year, and where people don't do that, we've acted against our councillors. So I really apologize. And so what I will do to you is personally, you have my undertaking, I will give you my details, or at least our team that is here, so we can make sure we follow up on that. As far as I know on our website, I can go on there and I can click and enter my address, and that will give me the name of the councillor. At least I know that for a fact. So if you went on our own website, you could click on, enter your address, and it will give you the name of the councillor. If that isn't happening, I'll follow up with that. But I know for a fact we've introduced that as a mechanism on our website so that our public reps are responsive. And then at the end of this, you have my undertaking on this issue. We'll follow up on that matter. You can get my details, and I'll make sure that councillor comes to account.
And he asked, when are you going to appoint a more assertive spokesperson on
the economy?
On the economy.
Look, economic issues sometimes become quite a bit difficult to hit hard on, because there are many different issues in the economy. It's a broad array. The economy is being hampered by being energy insecure, and I've got a strong spokesperson on energy. Our economy has been hampered because micro-enterprise fails. Yesterday I did an event on micro-enterprise and I speak on it. Our economy is hampered because our finances, our fiscal policy allows for an increase in public sector wage, and sometimes, so you've got to look at that, and I've just appointed now recently a spokesperson who came from defense in David Mania to move him now to finance. And then our economy is hampered by other components such as corruption, because what we see is corruption is that if corruption is on the rise, it decreases investor confidence. And we've certainly taken a stronger stance on this issue. And I'm working through the process of even our economic rescue package has been out online. And that's something that I personally as leader will continue to drive, and settling with our respective spokespeople on the issue. So we've just recently done the change, and it's been about a month or two since the new spokesperson has taken on the job and developing the new policy framework that takes us forward. So the change has taken place.
So we're into the last half an hour, 25 minutes or so.
Oh, there's still more?
Yeah.
All right.
Any questions? So Louis, that's still okay? All right, so we have two questions there right in front of you, and then another one there, please.
Sir, do you do you recognize the fact that people are leaving the country, top people in this country, brain drain and also economy people? Could you elaborate on that? And then second to that, many times up to this point we are criticized, the white Afrikaner, of the contribution in let's say the armies, the schools, etc. Instead of that, I would request that one rather recognize the fact and not criticize the fact. And if possible, if you could, just for the sake of 8 or 9% of the people, just recognize what they did for farming and schools and policing in this country today. Thank you.
Okay. There's just over there, please. The person with the grey hair. Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Anton Post. I just want to ask you, have you had any discussions with the government regarding the new visa regulations regarding unabridged certificates, birth certificates? I mean, Minister Hanekoma hasn't had effect. I think Deputy Minister Ramaphosa is now involved, and he's going to talk to the President about it, but it has a serious effect on the economy, and I would like to know from you whether you as a party has had discussions with government regarding that. Thank you.
Okay, shall we take one more? Was there another person here in front or what? If not, then right at the back. Right at the back.
Mr. Maimani, just a comment on, I would like to hear your comments on the continued deployment of the SANDF to the DRC and Sudan over the past 10 years, and how much this has been costing our economy and our country, and for almost no real concerted effects that we can see that anything's really happened. Thanks.
Okay, we have 4 questions, so shall we give Mr. Maimani the opportunity?
All right. On the first, which is a question about immigration and the immigration of South Africans. Immigration is a twofold issue. The first is people all over the world are entitled to move to whatever nation they want to move on. There are more Australians living outside of Australia, as an example, and if you went to Australia, I'm sure you'll find many South Africans there. So the issue is about a global network, and South Africa has become a lot more integrated, and there are different opportunities in different countries. And I think it's a welcomed thing in some instances when people can go, I can go learn a skill there, I can go develop myself there, I can do that. So I don't think sometimes we mustn't be anti-immigration or anti-people being able to travel in the world. I think we must be sober about this issue and understand that it's part of a global society that we live in. So I always say people must move because they can, not because they must. And it's the must question that I want to speak to. Because when people then immigrate on the basis of the fact that they must, then you've got a different problem on your hands. And I'm very aware of it, and something that is worrying. One of the things that I've become quite clear on is that it wasn't unique that in the late 80s, immigration was also in some ways part of the exercise. Because people lose business confidence, but you recognize the fact that it is a preempter to change. And when there's a change in government and a change of guard, you can open up more opportunities. One of the things that I'm really keen to do is if where we come into government, we want to open up our skills recruitment program, particularly for as what I call the African diaspora. So Africans who have left, regardless of race, and are living all over the world, that they can come in and deploy their skills here in South Africa. And they can come back better trained with other innovation and different skills, and they can assist us in being able to get our economy in the direction that we need to get it in. So the opportunities are abound if you are willing to see them that way. There's one, we can't just simply obsess about Cuba. It's one dynamic. But we've also got to think about where our doctors are at internationally. Can we not be recruiting those doctors, those engineers, South African people who need to come from a broad array to come into South Africa and contribute? So I think for me, it's in some ways, yes, clearly an indicator of a lack of confidence in this current government. But I believe if we could see the change, we could see the dynamics coming on board. So it is an economics question, but it's also a matter of deployment of skill into people. The second question about critics of Afrikaners, look, I think many people take a view that says the fight is always against the race. My view is the fight is always against the system. Apartheid was a system that needed to be defeated. That's why it was a system fought by many different people. It had dire consequences, make no mistake about that. And it was an evil system. But it had to be fought and defeated. Today, if we say there's a system that marginalizes people, we must continue to fight against the system. Because the fight is never against the people, it's against the system. Because when you defeat the system, the people must still stand up and work together to build the country that they want to see. That's why I still believe in a non-racial, reconciled South Africa. So I'm not a critic of any race, I'm a critic of a system. That's why when people even say today that, oh, now we've got a black government, we've got no energy, I find that quite offensive, actually. Because it's not about the race of the government, it's about the system. And if you oppose the system, oppose the system. But don't infuse that with some race and say, well, it's about this race. So I acknowledge the fact that I know I'm not standing up saying, look, we must laud this and applaud that. I'm standing up and saying we oppose the system, and therefore as a people, we must recognize that collectively we can build together. Because the building of schools and diverse areas take different people at different times. There have been some successes since 1994 that I must also celebrate. That's why I'm never saying here that everything is all dull and gloom. I see that there's some things that the ANC that have done that have been good for South Africa, and I must celebrate that, just like I'd celebrate any other thing. So I get your point, but I'd like to say it to, let's talk about systemic issues so that we defeat the system collectively. On the second question, which was about
certificates,
visa regulations.
Yes.
You would know that I went and called a special meeting with Minister Gigab. A year ago, I said to him, these visa regulations are going to have the consequences of economic suicide, just about. And I gave him a process and said to him, this is a different route we could go about this. Because visa, as part of a global society, we must deal with how we manage visas. His response was, don't take a dim view on the 30,000 children that get trafficked every year. I then wrote to him subsequent to that and said, how many have you investigated? His department responded by saying 13. Now 13 and 30,000 are far distant from each other. It's 13 children too many, but with great respect, I think that we must be more effective at how we deal with our border control. Because with great respect, I don't believe that children are being trafficked through OR Tambo. So we must decide where it's in fact happening, build the proper policing so that we can come in. If the issue is about biometrics, then why don't you have biometrics on arrival, which was the proposal I made to him. So let the people come in and they can issue you with the biometrics, you'll know immediately. Because in other countries, if you live in mainland China, you've got to get to a South African mission, which is in Beijing, which is another flight for you to get there before you can even get issued with a visa. Other nations don't even issue unabridged birth certificates for their kids. So you end up in a space where kids, if tantamount saying from those countries, people with kids cannot come to South Africa. And I'm of the view that tourism wasn't broken. Why are you trying to fix it? So the point at the end of the day is, I think we must suspend the visa regulations. I think we must have biometric testing on arrival, and we must make it possible for more people to come here, because I think tourism, we know, for every 12 tourists that arrive here, at least one job is created. I ran a protest outside the Home Affairs. It wasn't a month, it was about a month and a half ago, so that we can submit a memorandum to say, submit those. The government responded by saying they're having an interministerial task team, so I'm waiting to find out what the task team is going to recommend at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, we can't wait longer. With every passing day, tourism is not like an on and off switch. You don't just, when you switch it back on, now everybody will come flocking. You've got to build the confidence over time. And with every passing day that this task team is not pronouncing on this issue, the more tourists we're losing. 34% of Chinese are stopped coming to South Africa because there are visa regulations. This is an economic problem, and I'm of the view that it stems out of the fact that there's no coordination amongst government departments. That's why the Minister of Tourism can say X, and the Minister of Home Affairs can say Y. So I'm standing here saying to you, we're fighting to make sure those regulations are suspended, at least dealt with differently. And if you want to deal with visas, why don't you rank countries? Why don't you sit down and say, we know a person coming from this country, that country, that country. It's how internet, any country operates like that. They are clear about which countries pose a threat for them, which countries don't pose a threat for them, and they have different visa adjudication processes for all of that whole thing. We must take a proactive economic stance when it comes to this issue. On the third one,
deployment of soldiers to
the
Africa.
deployment of soldiers. It's always a difficult one because we're part of the African Union. And as a big country in Africa, it is in our interest for Africa to remain stable. So I disagree marginally that it has borne no fruit. Peace in Africa has become better as a conflict resolution than perhaps what we're seeing in other regions of the world. If you think about what's happening in the Middle East, when you think about what's happening in other parts. It's crucial for us that we monitor situations in Africa, because I think our next growth as South Africa must be how we better trade with Africa. You know, in the EU, intra-trade amongst EU member states is at 60%. In Africa, intra-trade amongst AU member states is 10%. That's not good enough. We would be trading better with each other, creating much better cooperation, and I think our peacekeeping missions are crucial to decrease. You can recall, not so long ago, it was in the late 90s, we were talking about the violence in the DRC, in different parts like that, and I think our peacekeeping missions have been quite effective at making sure that we decrease conflict. In a world where there's Afro-pessimism anyways, we're trying to prove the point that ultimately we can keep the peace so that investment is possible here in Africa. So I think it's borne some fruit, maybe not to the level that we'd like, but I think it has been successful.
Okay, in the last about 10 minutes, any other questions, please? No more questions. Right here, and
there's so many.
Just speak in the mic so that we can hear you, please.
I think you heard the question.
Just repeat that, please.
All the murders in this country.
Yeah.
Shouldn't charity begin at home instead of sending our soldiers out of here? I understand what you said, but surely we have a war here too. It's just a slow one.
Okay, crime in general, therefore. Any other? Rudolph?
Mr. Mangani, you were asked a question about the local politics earlier on. Would you venture to say something about what's happening in Stellenbosch? Because we seem to be reading a lot more about infighting within the DA, and we certainly don't want the ANC to retake that municipality.
What about Stellenbosch? About the local government politics or about the university?
Local government politics.
Okay. All right, and then the third one there. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Alberto Casalega. I just want to know, what is the DA's stance on quotas in sport?
About?
Quotas in sport.
Quotas in sport. Quotas in sport.
Okay, shall we take that? Crime, Stellenbosch, and quotas in sport.
Let me say, in the Constitution of the Republic, it puts security in this country, it defines it in three. It says state security, police, and the defense. The defense isn't trained to police. just like the police untrained to fight wars. And I think it's an important thing because often people called for the army to come into areas. But make no mistake, the army has got certain provisions. They can't come here and police in this instance. It's not their training. Where the crucial issue is about how do we capacitate police? That's a better question. And what specialized units do we need to deal with particular crimes? So when it comes to question of farm murders, surely we could be talking about a specialized unit that looks into that particular murder as a particular aspect. When it comes to domestic violence and sexual assault, can't we have a sexual violence court that prosecutes that so that you end up with anyone who commits that crime, at least in the process of justice, being able to get themselves ending up in jail? Part of our challenge is that in our justice process, when someone commits a crime, they end up in jail and they can end up back on the streets. So it frustrates the police because they feel like, I arrested this guy so many times, they end up back at the streets. One of the key errors that we made was precisely because we tried to make the police a military service. That's why the police commissioner is called a general. In which world is that? We've militarized the police, issued more weapons into the place, and now we're ending up with a war zone between the police and the civilians. The other problem with crime is that there are too many vacancies in certain provinces of police, trained police. So I'm asking to train the police better, put the appropriate units better, but here's the other thing I'm asking for is, don't deploy somebody who knows nothing about policing to lead the police. Why don't you recruit from the police the best so that you can get a top cop who knows the job about policing, so that you can ultimately avoid other incidents that are taking place. And when you come with me to a police station, you'll see that there are often not enough vehicles. There are often, the detectives investigate the same, like you report a motor vehicle accident, someone reports a murder, somebody reports whatever, they all treat it the same. And I'm saying we must specialize more so that we are clear about the nature and the extent of investigation. As far as infighting in Stellenbosch, look, in any cycle, as you know, we're preparing for next year. So we're doing, it's not infighting, what we're doing is we're selecting candidates for Stellenbosch next year, so that we can get the best. I mean, no mayor is guaranteed a job. When you finish your job, when you finish your term in the DA in the 5 years, you've got to reapply for your job. Doesn't matter how good you are. Helen Zille won Mayor of the Year. If she finished her term as Mayor of the City of Cape Town, she would have to reapply for it. She has to go through a selection panel that says to her, you are good enough or you are not good enough, and therefore you can stand again. Because if a better candidate comes on board, believe me, we'll choose the better candidate. It's the same at Stellenbosch. It's the same as any municipality. Mayor de Lille will do exactly the same exercise. She has to stand before a selection panel that will say to her, either you must stand again as Mayor of Cape Town or not. So all of that, that's what's happening. And subsequent to that, of course, there's sometimes some challenges, but we believe we'll choose the best team to serve Stellenbosch, and we'll fight to make sure that we retain it. The last thing is about quotas in sport, because this is a very serious issue. When you apply a quota mechanism, it is derived out of this thinking. It says you must take racial representation, draw up a quota, and then say that's how many players must be in the side. So for hypothetical sense, you would say 80% of our population is black, therefore 80% of the people who play for the Springboks must be black. Now you can't apply it like that because it's true also in business. Remember the Jimmy Manye argument. He said, if you then take the national demographics and you apply them to the Western Cape, and then you decide that there are not enough Indian people in the Western Cape, well, you must supply more Indian people into the Western Cape, which is no different to apartheid. You talk about people who are missing apartheid.
And the colours must go on the great track.
You remember that, exactly that. And exactly that same argument. For me, the view is that you cannot infuse quotas in sport. If the whole team, the issue must be, as Oregon Hoskins correctly maybe said, he said, why are there only 500? We are choosing a rugby Springbok side from 500,000 people. We should rather be choosing a Springbok side from 5 million people. And the point simply is, if you don't do enough grassroots development and make sure that there are the schools, more schools are playing rugby, more schools are playing soccer, etc., you can diversify the team. So yes, as I sit here today, yeah, of course I've got to look at the Springbok side and say, is it diverse enough? It's a project that they must work on. Make sure they diversify the team.
Who must work on it?
But it must be a combination of saying, MECs, sports people, we must develop the grassroots level. Why are there no new rugby fields being built in townships that I'm seeing? Why should we not making sure that more and more South Africa, you know Steve Biko played rugby. We should be making sure that places like the Eastern Cape have got more rugby fields being built to them so that we can ultimately make sure we populate all the way to the top talent that can come through. So it's a combination of what government does, it's a combination of what SARU as a union does, because they've got training, they can deploy coaches in areas, make sure that school teachers are trained properly to be able to administer the sport, so that at the end of the day we can sit back and say, who knows, one day you can have a diverse Springbok side with different players, a diverse soccer side, a diverse tennis side, doesn't matter what sport it is, but you diversify it on the basis of the fact that you've got a talent pool that's coming from the ground up and you can pick from wherever you like to pick.
Okay, perhaps we have time for one or two questions. Anyone else? Anyone else? There, one, yes?
Baie dankie en goeiemôre almal. Goeiemôre ook aan my kollegas wat hier rond is en ouer kollegas wat ek sien. Welkom op Potchefstroom. My naam is Ina Stols. Ek is 'n raadslid in Potchefstroom. Klokwe. Ek is 'n ANC raadslid. Ek wil net graag weet, indien die DA die Labour law kan verander, hoe sou hulle dit graag wil verander? Baie dankie.
Labour law, okay, and one more question. Is there one more? Nee. Okay, let's go for that, Labour law, and then to end off, perhaps you can just quickly give us a few points from your vision, the Vision 2029, and then we'll end with that.
On the question of labour law, look, there are components of labour law that need review, and these are the points that we said. We said, can we not democratize strike action? But people are entitled their right to vote as to whether to strike or not to strike. So that when there's bargaining in any negotiating forum, people know that they can vote on those issues. The second dynamic is about the issues around criminalizing of violence at strike actions and holding the unions accountable. When people march and someone goes and loots a store, that store either has to claim from insurance, and if it's not insured, whose loss is it? And why is no one criminalized for that action? So we've asked for those questions. Other components of labor law, such as issues like, I'm not sure where the question speaks to issues of employment equity, whether BBBEE, that has a component of labor built into it, is we look at the fact that we say diverse targeting so that you can ensure that there are appropriate targets being fused into work, skills transfer, and we've incentivized that. On the BBBEE law, we've made it quite clear that issues such as procurement must be looked into. The scorecard must ensure that workplace diversity programs are in place. The scorecard must ensure that ultimately that the appropriate training is brought into place. So it's a whole suite of legislation that you change, not only exclusive to what currently sits in the labor law, but also sits in other components of economic imperatives. The best, I suppose you save the best for last. Look, South Africa has a painful history. We must never forget that. We mustn't also forget the fact that, yes, race still today indicates a proxy for disadvantage. We're quite clear about that. Where I stand today is to build a South Africa, A, that is prosperous. We have to be growing our economy. Our Vision 2029 says we must be growing at least between 5 to 7%, because that way you can ensure that you make a dent to unemployment. Second is that we must be an inclusive South Africa. We must make sure that South Africans who are left out of the economy are part of this economy. And this by making sure that you defeat all the barriers to entry. Make it possible for micro-enterprise to thrive. Thirdly, that it must be a South Africa for all. In other words, that opens up opportunities for South Africans from all walks of life. So that it doesn't matter what race you are. We can ultimately ensure that, as Robert Sobukwe once said, that we build the only race that will matter is the human race. Fourthly, we must build a safe South Africa, and that's where we talk about trained police. making sure that we have a police leadership that in fact is not a police force, but it's a police service, that it's in partnership with communities. We must fifthly build a nation at which education is at the forefront of making sure not only young South Africans are unemployed, but the greatest tragedy is the fact that they are unemployable. And if you don't give skills to young people and you don't give skills or an education basis that makes sure young South Africans can ultimately be able to get the right skills coming out of school, we'll battle in the competition front. We must build a South Africa that is born out of the Constitution, because the Constitution of the Republic gives rights to everybody, gives rights for people to exist regardless of where they come from, to practice whatever religion they want, to marry whomever they like, so that ultimately the Constitution reigns supreme as the supreme rule of law. And I believe that it's possible, because that's why we talk about values of freedom, fairness, and opportunity. Because freedom, fairness, and opportunity says, you and I, Freek, may be of different races, but we care about the same things. We care that our kids succeed. We care that we're safe. We care that South Africa is fair. We care that South Africa opens up opportunities. And we care that South Africa advances the notion of freedom. That's why when I look at even our national anthem, I think it epitomizes the fact that we're a diverse nation, but we can celebrate our diversity. But it comes out of those values that say we transcend race, we transcend our own history, and we focus on tomorrow. That's the vision I wake up every morning fighting for. It's a vision, certainly, that will pursue with everything that is inside of me. And I hope that we can live in that country in a time my kids get to one day become economic participants in this country.
Ladies and gentlemen. Baie dankie, dames en heren. Baie dankie. Thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of our discussion with Musi Maimane, leader of the DA. Môre praat ons oor die vakbondwese wat al hoe meer verpolitiseerd raak. En ons het vir Willem Zima, Wawie en Flip Buys hierso wat 'n bietjie gaan gesels en nog 'n ander arbeidskenner wat 'n bietjie met ons gaan gesels oor watter rol gaan die vakbondwese speel vir volgende jaar alreeds in terme van politiek. Gaan ons 'n nuwe werkersparty kry? Wat se standpunte gaan hulle hê? Gaan hulle nog verder links wees as die kommunistiese party? Ensovoort. So môre selfde tyd 8:30 tot 10:00 hier in hierdie selfde plek. So thank you very much for being with us. See you tomorrow again at 8:30.
Baie dankie meneer.
Yeah, thank you very much.